Hi everyone, welcome to Convey Church's vlog again today. Today our subject is rebuilding walls, rebuilding lives. I'm just going to start by reading Psalm 126 verses 1 to 3 that say, "When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. And then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad." And I what just do today is I'll just read the thought from the book and then just my own thoughts just on the end, if that's okay with you. The return is one of the great themes of history and literature, and nowhere is it more clearly written than in the return of Judeans to Jerusalem after 70 years in captivity. Babylon was superseded by Persia, and the time of their release had finally come. Cyrus was an enlightened ruler who followed a policy of multiculturalism throughout his empire. Prompted by God, he proclaimed the release of as many Jews as wished to leave to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Unlike many other returns of refugees or exiles, whose first concern is to find their families and homes and retrieve their possessions, this first return was focused on the temple. The Jewish people's relationship with God was intrinsic to their identity. It was expressed in terms of place, the land, the city, the temple. The land had been lost and the buildings destroyed, but when the time came to return, the first opportunity granted to them was to reinstate the worship of God at the centre of their corporate life. Despite opposition, the temple was completed in 20 years amid great rejoicing. However, it wasn't until 60 years later that Ezra, a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, led a further wave of immigration. Once again, the main emphasis was on the temple and its worship, but Ezra was also given administrative and civil authority. Nevertheless, the walls and gates of the city were still in ruins, and it fell to Nehemiah a decade or so later to organize the rebuilding. And as we read his story, we're able to see how the restoration of God's people involved practical matters as well as spiritual matters. In all these tasks, Ezra and Nehemiah were conscious of the land of the Lord, of the hand of the Lord over their plans and actions. The people likewise entered into the vision of their leaders, flinging themselves wholeheartedly into their building projects. The walls were finished, houses rebuilt, and towns resettled. When all the work was completed, they asked Ezra to bring out the book of the law of the Lord, and as they listened, understood, and responded to it, they recognized that the restoration of their community rested on the restoration of their relationship with God. In Nehemiah, we read about the Judeans return to Jerusalem to read the temple and their homes. After being exiled in the foreign land, they were finally allowed to return home. And the psalm that we've read this morning is a subject of today's topic. It is a psalm of praise to God from the people, rejoicing that they have been able to return home. For the people of God, it was a return to their home and a return to a full relationship with God. As the temple and their homes and the wall around the city were rebuilt, they turned to Ezra and asked him to open the book of the law and to read from it. And then in Nehemiah 9, we read the Israelites confess their sin to God. They recounted everything they had done in their past before God. Why? Because they wanted to ensure that they were starting their time back in their homeland right with God. They made a covenant with God that was sealed by a lot of people. And this was done that not only could the walls be rebuilt, but so could their relationships with God. It was important that they were built on a strong foundation, not just for those returning, but for generations to come. They just read the mistakes that the past Israelites had made before God, and it was important they learnt from those mistakes, acknowledged them, and looked to move on from them. In verse 9 of Nehemiah 9, the Israelites start their confession to God, and they start by saying, "You are the Lord, you alone." And that's an important statement for them to make. They need to acknowledge right from the outset who God is, and it's important for them to make that declaration to God. They're coming before the Lord, the one and only God, the only one that they can confess their sin to. For the Israelites, it's a time of renewal, a fresh start, and it was important for them to make sure that everything was in order and right with God. And it's an important message for us today as well. Gordon mentioned on Tuesday evening at the BBC how it's important for us all to make sure that our spiritual foundation is sound. Maybe you once knew God, but your relationship has slipped and you want to come back to Him. Well, the great news is God wants you to return to Him, like the Israelites did. He wants you to acknowledge your sin and to come before the Lord, the only Lord, and ask Him to forgive you. And the great news is that because of what Jesus has done for you on the cross, that He will forgive you. And then you can start to build your life the way that God wants you to live it. Ensure that you rebuild your spiritual life how God wants it to be, so that your faith has a firm foundation. And it's true for those of us today who have a relationship with God as well. We need to ensure that our lives are built around how God wants us to be. Is there an area in your life that you know isn't right with God? An area that you know you're letting God down with? Commit to God today that you're going to turn away from that you're going to rebuild that part in your life, to let it be a part of your life that is rebuilt for honouring God. It's a joy to have a relationship with God. God is so good to us. He's so faithful to us. And when the Israelites were back in their homeland, when they confessed their sin to God and they committed themselves afresh to Him, no wonder that they were able to say the words that we read in Psalm 126, 1-3. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. And they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.